I love camping, especially when it's just me and the quiet of the woods. But one trip a few years back changed everything. It was late fall in northern Wisconsin, that last window of opportunity before the deep freeze and the first heavy snow. I'd been to this particular forest countless times. It's a beautiful, sprawling stretch of pine trees, dotted with these small, quiet lakes. The best part, almost no tourists. It's the kind of place you go to really disconnect. The first 3 days were pure bliss. I spent my time hiking the familiar trails, taking quick, bracing dips in the ice-cold lake water. And at night, just listening to the haunting calls of the loons, echoing across the water. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. But on the morning of the fourth day, that peace was completely shattered. When I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, my heart just dropped into my stomach. The ground was covered in footprints, heavy boot prints, pressed deep into the damp earth, all around my campsite. They weren't mine. I wear trail runners. These were big, heavy-soled boots. Some of the tracks lead right up to the flap of my tent, stopping just inches from where I'd been sleeping. The ground was still soft from the night frost, which meant the prints were fresh. Whoever had been here, they had come while I was asleep, completely vulnerable. A cold dread washed over me. My first instinct was to figure out who it was. I packed a small day bag and started searching. I walked the perimeter of my site, then pushed deeper into the woods, calling out, "Hello?" I followed the shoreline of the lake, looking for any sign of another person, a stray piece of gear, another tent, maybe a canoe pulled up on the shore. Nothing. I walked all the way back to the small dirt lot where I'd parked my car. Mine was the only vehicle there. There were no other tire tracks, no signs that anyone else had driven in or out recently. It made absolutely no sense. Whoever this person was, they had walked into my camp, circled my tent while I slept, and then just vanished without a trace. It was deeply unsettling. The feeling of being watched, of someone knowing I was there, alone, was impossible to shake. That night, I built a bigger fire than usual. I sat there for hours, just staring into the flames, trying to rationalize what had happened. I told myself it was probably just a lost hunter or a hiker who stumbled upon my camp by mistake, realized someone was there, and quietly left so as not to disturb me. It was a flimsy explanation, but it was all I had. I tried to push the unease away, to reclaim that sense of peace I'd come here for. I must have finally dozed off in my camp chair around midnight, lulled by the warmth of the fire. I was in that weird, half-conscious state, not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. And that's when I heard it. A man's voice, soft and distant, carried on the wind. It sighed, my name, Evan. It was so clear. I jolted upright, instantly wide awake, every nerve in my body on fire. I scanned the darkness beyond my firelight, my heart hammering against my ribs. The forest was dead silent. The only sound was the crackling of the logs in the fire. "Who's there?" I yelled out, my voice sounding small and shaky in the vast emptiness. The only reply was my own voice echoing back at me from across the lake. For a moment, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. A dream, maybe, a trick of the mind in that half-sleep state. Your brain can play weird tricks on you when you're tired and alone in the woods. I took a few deep breaths and sat back down, telling myself to get a grip. But then I heard it again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. "Evan, come here." The voice was low and had this strange, pleading quality to it, like someone was hurt and needed help. But there was something else in it too, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I grabbed my heavy flashlight from my pack and stood up, my back to the fire. I stood right at the edge of the circle of light, peering into the impenetrable wall of darkness between the pine trees. My hand was shaking so badly the beam of light danced and trembled on the tree trunks. And then I saw it. Movement. Just a flicker. A shadow shifting between two large pines, right at the edge of where my flashlight beam could reach. It was subtle, but it was definitely there. A human shape. And that's when the two terrifying facts crashed together in my mind. One, there was someone out there in the dark. And two, they knew my name. They were calling me, trying to lure me away from the safety of my fire and into the pitch-black woods. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me not to move, not to answer, not to go toward the voice. I didn't. I made a decision right then and there. This trip was over. I started packing my gear, my hands clumsy with adrenaline. I fumbled with my tent poles, shoved my sleeping bag into its sack, my fingers feeling thick and useless. All I wanted was to be in my car and gone. Every few seconds, the voice would call out again, each time seeming to come from a different spot, but always getting closer. Evan. It was a horrifying game of cat and mouse. As I was frantically trying to get my tent down, the fire began to die down. The logs were burning to embers, and my circle of light was shrinking. The darkness was closing in, and as the woods grew quieter, I heard a new sound. Footsteps. The distinct crunch of dry leaves and twigs under a heavy boot, just a few yards away from me, just beyond what I could see. That was it. I didn't care about the tent anymore. I abandoned it. I killed my flashlight, plunging myself into the same darkness as whatever was out there. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and I just ran. I ran blindly, stumbling down the familiar trail toward the parking lot, not daring to use my light for fear it would make me an easy target. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to trip me, but I just kept running, fueled by pure terror. After what felt like an eternity, I risked a quick glance back. From a safe distance, I could just barely make out the faint, dying orange glow of my campfire, and standing right beside it, silhouetted against the last of the light, was a tall figure. It was standing perfectly still, just watching the spot where I had been seconds before. I never went back to that forest again. It was just another Tuesday until Cameron got fired. I felt bad. So when he cornered me by the elevator, looking a little too intense, and suggested a last-minute camping trip, I couldn't say no. He said he needed to clear his head, get some fresh air. He had a specific place in mind, a patch of forest hours from anywhere, one he insisted was perfect. I figured, why not? A little nature might do us both some good. The drive out was weird though. I tried making small talk, cracking jokes about our boss, but Cameron just stared out the window, giving one-word answers. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was heavy. It felt less like two friends going camping, and more like I was being transported somewhere. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel the entire time. By the time we pulled onto the dirt road leading into the woods, I had this sinking feeling in my stomach. This trip wasn't about fresh air. It was about something else entirely. The sun was already dipping below the horizon when we finally found a clearing. The air grew cold fast. As we started setting up the tents, I noticed Cameron's strange behavior getting worse. He wasn't focused on the task at hand. Instead, his eyes kept darting towards the dense, dark tree line that surrounded us. He'd glance at it, then check his watch, then back to the trees. It was a nervous, repetitive cycle. After we got the tents pitched, he stood up abruptly. "I'll be right back," he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. He disappeared into the woods, without another word. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself he just needed a moment alone. But when he came back 10 minutes later, he was even quieter, his face pale in the fading light. An hour later, it happened again. "I'll be right back." Same flat tone, same direction. This time, he was gone for almost 20 minutes. The forest was eerily silent, and I was starting to feel genuinely scared. His repeated trips weren't random. It felt like he was following a schedule, or maybe meeting someone. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. I eventually zipped myself into my sleeping bag, exhausted but unable to sleep. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made my heart pound. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong. It was voices. Faint, whispering voices coming from the woods. I held my breath, straining to listen. One of the voices was definitely Cameron's, low and urgent. The other was deeper, indistinct, but it was there. I slowly unzipped my tent and peered out. The campfire had burned down to glowing embers, casting long dancing shadows. Cameron's tent was just a few feet away, its flap open and swaying gently in the breeze. But he wasn't inside. His sleeping bag was empty. My blood ran cold. He was out there, in the pitch-black forest, talking to someone. The feeling of unease I'd had all day erupted into full-blown terror. This wasn't just a weird camping trip. I was in the middle of something dangerous, something I didn't understand, and the one person I was with had lied to me from the start. Just as I was trying to decide what to do, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Cameron. He walked back into the campsite with a casual stroll, as if he'd just gone for a midnight walk. A calm, almost serene smile was plastered on his face. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice unnervingly normal. "Cameron, who were you talking to?" I demanded, my own voice trembling. His smile didn't waver. "What are you talking about?" "I was just stretching my legs. It's dead quiet out here." He gestured to the silent woods around us. The denial was too quick, too smooth. It was rehearsed. "I heard you, Cameron. I heard voices," I insisted, my panic rising. His expression hardened instantly. The fake calm vanished, replaced by a cold defensiveness. "You're hearing things," he snapped. "You're just tired." His sudden switch, the way his eyes became cold and distant, was more terrifying than anything else. He was a stranger. He was hiding something, or someone, and they were close. That was it. I had to get out. I started stuffing my sleeping bag into its sack, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. "What are you doing?" Cameron asked, his voice low and threatening. "I'm leaving," I said, not looking at him. "I'm walking back to the main road." As the words left my mouth, we both froze. A new sound cut through the silence. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching our camp from the darkness of the woods. They weren't animal footsteps, they were human. They crunched on the dry leaves with a steady, unhurried rhythm. They were coming for us. I took a step back, instinctively turning to run, but Cameron moved faster. He stepped directly in front of me, blocking my path. His face was a mask of grim determination in the moonlight. He leaned in close, his voice a chilling whisper that cut straight through my soul. "Don't run." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The sudden invitation, the silent drive, the trips into the woods, the whispers, it was all a setup. Cameron hadn't brought me here to escape. He'd brought me here as bait, and whatever was walking out of those woods was here for me. The woods always have a way of making you feel small, don't they? For one hiker, that feeling was about to become something much more sinister. The moment her boots hit the narrow forest trail, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. It was that unmistakable, ancient feeling of being watched. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just the rustle of leaves, or the shadows playing tricks. But the deeper she ventured into the dense wilderness, the more the feeling intensified. The air grew heavy and still, the usual symphony of the forest, the birdsong. The chittering of squirrels had fallen silent. It was as if the entire woods was holding its breath, waiting. The silence was more unnerving than any sound could have been. Every snap of a twig under her own feet made her jump. She kept glancing over her shoulder, scanning the thickets of trees, but saw nothing. Yet, the sensation persisted. A pair of invisible eyes, boring into her back. She finally found a secluded clearing. A small patch of earth bathed in the fading afternoon light. It was a perfect spot to camp, or so she thought. As she pushed the last peg of her tent into the ground, a figure seemed to materialize from the tree line. It was a man. He moved with a strange, unnatural stillness. He was dressed simply, carrying only a small sling bag and a thin, flimsy-looking tent. No backpack, no food supplies, no water bottle, not even a sleeping bag. It didn't make any sense. How could anyone survive a night out here with so little? But the most unsettling thing about him was his smile. It was a wide, fixed grin that only involved his mouth. His eyes remained cold, vacant, and completely devoid of any warmth or expression. It was the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was a mask. He didn't say a word, just stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her finish, setting up her camp. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. She tried to go about her evening routine, preparing a small meal, but the man's presence was a constant, oppressive weight. She'd busied herself with a task, then look up, and her heart would leap into her throat. Every single time, he was already staring directly at her. His head was slightly tilted, that blank mouth-only smile still plastered on his face. It never wavered, never faltered. He hadn't moved an inch since he arrived. He just stood there, a silent sentinel in the encroaching darkness. She offered a weak, hesitant wave, but he didn't respond, he just stared. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the forest, every rustle of leaves, sounded like a footstep approaching her tent. She spent the night huddled in her sleeping bag, wide awake, listening. As the first grey light of dawn broke through the canopy, she knew she couldn't stay. Her hands trembled as she hastily began to pack her gear, shoving everything into her backpack with frantic, clumsy movements. She just had to get out of there. As she worked, she chanced a look over at the man. The moment her eyes met his smile vanished. It didn't fade. It just dropped from his face, leaving behind an expression of pure, chilling emptiness. He was no longer a strange, smiling figure. He was a threat. He stood perfectly still, his eyes tracking her every move as she dismantled her tent and shouldered her pack. The air crackled with a new, palpable tension. Without a word, without a backward glance, she turned and bolted from the clearing, plunging back onto the narrow trail she'd followed the day before. Her only thought was escape. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she half ran, half stumbled along the path. She didn't dare look back, not at first, but then she heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of footsteps. Someone was behind her. Fighting the terror that threatened to paralyze her, she risked a quick glance over her shoulder. It was him. He wasn't running. He wasn't even walking quickly. He was just following. He maintained a steady, unhurried pace, that blank expression locked on his face. She picked up her speed, her lungs burning, branches whipping at her face and arms. But no matter how fast she ran, the distance between them never changed. He was always there, a persistent shadow just behind her. He never called out, never made a sound other than the steady beat of his feet on the dirt trail. It was a relentless, silent pursuit, a terrifying game of cat and mouse where she was hopelessly outmatched. After what felt like an eternity, she saw it through the trees. The familiar shape of her small, isolated cabin. A wave of relief, sharp and desperate, washed over her. She burst from the tree line, sprinted across the small yard, fumbled with the key, and threw herself inside, slamming the heavy wooden door shut, and twisting every lock she had. She leaned against the door, gasping for breath, her entire body trembling. For a few moments, there was only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of her heart. Silence. Maybe she'd lost him. Maybe it was over. Then it started, a heavy, deliberate pounding on the door. Boom, boom, boom. It echoed through the small cabin, each impact vibrating through the floorboards and up her spine. She scrambled away from the door, backing into the center of the room. The pounding stopped, and an even more terrifying sound began. The rattle of the windows as he circled the cabin, testing each one, knocking harder and harder, the sound growing in intensity, a violent, percussive rhythm of pure menace. She grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely dial. The police operator tried to keep her calm, promising that officers were on their way, but the drive to her remote cabin would take time. All she could do was wait, listening to the relentless assault on her sanctuary. The knocking continued, moving from window to window, a constant, terrifying reminder of the thing that was just outside, trying to get in. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more frightening. She held her breath, straining to hear any sound, any indication that he was still there. Nothing. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the distant but welcome sound of sirens grew louder, and the flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness of the woods. The police arrived, weapons drawn, and swept the area. But they found nothing. There was no man, no tent, no small sling bag. Even the ground around the cabin was clear, no footprints, no disturbed leaves. The forest looked pristine, untouched, as if he had never been there at all. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The officers were skeptical, suggesting it was her imagination, the stress of being alone in the wilderness. But as she stood in her living room, wrapped in a blanket, one of the officers called her over to the window. There, on the cold glass, faint and eerily fresh in the morning light, was the perfect, unmistakable shape of a single handprint. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more chilling tales.